Hello there. Today's video is going to be a bit different to my usual programming. Today I want to draw attention to something very important and a lot more serious than what I would usually cover. Please don't skip this because this has got some important info. Here's a rundown of how today's video is going to work. I'm going to talk about a fundraiser that is in support of a new pen pal of mine. Even if you aren't in a position to donate, it would be extremely helpful if you could watch today's video all the way through, as it helps with the algorithm. That way the video gets pushed out more and it means the fundraiser is more likely to gain traction. Oh, and I also want to add that ads will be on for this video. If you don't mind letting the ads play, that will be great because I will be donating the AdSense from this video. And even better, if you like and comment, feel free to share a fun fact with me. So even though it's going to be a little bit heavier, I hope that you will learn something from it and find it useful. Right. Now, let's meet Ahmed.
How my life was like before the war. My name is Ahmed and I'm 26 years old. Before the war started, I finished my studies and got a degree in media specialization. So I have a passion for photography and I dream of turning it into my career one day, but jobs for young people in Gaza are very rare due to the current situation. During my free time, I used to love horseback riding, reading, weightlifting and exploring nature, but I still loved spending time with my family very much, including my sister Ahmed, who recently graduated with a degree in medicine, so now she's one of the most relied on people since she's a doctor at just age 24. Our father was martyred in 2003 when I was just 6 years old, so I never really knew the tenderness of having a dad, but thankfully my mother's alive and always sacrificed for our family. These are some flowers that we bought for her last Mother's Day.
Now, my only focus is keeping my family safe. In the early days of the war, I lost 21 relatives, and my family has been displaced 6 times. We now live in makeshift tents in Khan Yunis, with no real shelter. My niece Tagreed was born in November 2023, when we were first displaced. She's never known the comfort of a home or a peaceful night's sleep. Our conditions are beyond difficult. Food is scarce, and what little we find is overpriced and poor in quality. We're forced to survive on whatever we can find. Diseases are spreading rapidly due to the lack of clean water and hygiene products, putting us at constant risk of illness. Every night, planes fly low over our tents, adding to the stress and fear we live with, especially for the children. The days are unbearably hot, and with the winter approaching, we don't know how we'll survive the cold without proper shelter. We are trying to raise awareness of the severe hardships we face in Gaza: lack of food, the spread of diseases, and constant fear of attacks. We endure, hoping the world will see our suffering and help provide the relief we desperately need. The GoFundMe and PayPal links will be in the description. Oh, and make sure to follow him on Instagram to check up on him. Ahmed also asked me to share a fundraiser for a woman named Narman, her husband and their 4 children who have been displaced to Rafah. Donating to either or both of these is obviously incredibly helpful, but if you aren't in a position to donate, please don't stress. Commenting, engaging with this video, sharing it will help tremendously. So thank you so much for listening. Now to the next part of the video. There's a lot of discourse online about obligations and expectations when it comes to public figures, influencers, etc. And people have rightly asked me to speak on this, and I have casually, I've mentioned in videos on Instagram and stuff, but in short, my position is free Palestine. The long version of it is that I am aware that the fact that I was born here in the UK was a pure geographical lottery. It was just sheer luck that I wasn't born in a war zone. And the funny thing about hearing Ahmed's story is that he and I have a lot of things in common. Similar ages, he's a photographer, I was a photographer before I started YouTube. And if you look at his content on his Instagram, he's clearly got a talent and an eye for content making. And it just makes you think like where he'd be if he wasn't having to think about surviving every day. And it's a sobering reminder. And if you thought, as I was just talking, Tara, why are you talking about yourself when you're talking about Palestine? And that's a very fair response. The reason I gave that personal example and made that parallel is to highlight how personalizing these issues keeps us connected and forces us to empathize, because it is so easy to detach and become apathetic when it's an issue that is far away or not affecting anyone that we know directly. I will get into that in detail in a minute. So I first became aware of Palestine due to the parallels with Ireland. My family are from all over Ireland, and whenever I'd visit Belfast, I'd see artwork as homage to Palestine. There's this sign that says sort of Viva la Palestine, or Free Palestine, it kind of in a similar style to the Hollywood sign. And I remember seeing that for the first time in my early teens and being like, what's that about? And giving it a little Google. So it started to be on my radar then. I still didn't know a lot about it though. I'd say that I started to properly engage and start to educate myself on this, I want to say maybe 7 or 8 years ago, when I was a photographer, as mentioned earlier. I took some performance photos for a performance artist who was on tour in the UK, and this was Reham Isaac, a Palestinian performance artist. This was the first time I had ever met someone from Palestine, and we got talking, and she told me all about the art scene in Palestine. After having only seen Palestine in the context of war on the news and in media, it dawned on me that the people there aren't just numbers, but people with interests and hobbies, and some theatre kids. They're a plight affecting everywhere. But on a serious note, even if you live far away from a place, humans are humans, and they just want to get on with their lives just like you or I. So next, I want to talk about apathy. When we see situations like this happening in the world, people who are otherwise good people can feel inclined to sit back and respond with apathy. So why is this? I think this comes from a feeling of helplessness. When you feel helpless, you end up doing nothing to avoid feeling. It's a bit like climate change, an issue that, to be brutally honest, I'm quite apathetic about because I feel so powerless. So I avoid it and don't engage with it as much as I know I should if I want to be a person who's in line with my values and the values I preach. And I think it's the same thing with human rights abuses that we see across the world. It is really tempting to feel apathetic. I want to stress that it's really important to stay connected, even if it feels easier and safer to be apathetic. I forgot to add a really important caveat that apathy is a privilege. If you are able to be apathetic about an issue, it's because it doesn't affect you personally. So yeah, just want to make it clear that I am very aware that I have that privilege. I know it feels like we can't control anything that goes on with our governments, beyond protesting and voting or not voting, but we can do a small part to help people affected by these atrocities. Lend a helping hand by donating. And going back to what I said earlier, you shouldn't have to be the same as someone to care about them. And I know this might seem really obvious, but I think even people who describe themselves as empathetic can detach when they don't feel like they relate to the person. So by which I mean people who are really far away. If you don't know anyone from the region, it's harder to connect to the issue. And I think a great way to humanize them is to look at individuals, personal details. I know it feels gross and weird to think about yourself when you're thinking about such a big issue, but that is how you empathize. Oh, and I also just want to make a general note. I'm really sorry if I mispronounce names. I've tried to find videos of them. So these are my attempts at replicating the pronunciation. But for example, I think about Auni Elders, a 12-year-old boy who in 2022 posted a video celebrating 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. And he shared his goal to reach 100,000. And I remember that feeling. You're on top of the world. It's really such a delight of a video to watch. Now, you might hear me talking about this and think, oh God, he's dead, isn't he? And yes, he and his siblings were killed in an airstrike. He now has 1.7 million subscribers, and he should be alive to see it. He should have been allowed to grow up. And I bring up this example not to paralyze you with sadness or hopelessness, but to remind you of why you should care. Alni might not be alive to live out his dreams, but there are still plenty of people in Gaza who are. So we have to keep engaging, we have to keep fighting for them, so people can survive, be able to live out your dreams just like you or I. And again, I know it's really easy to detach because it's just constant bad news and sad news. But if you are in the headspace for it, I want to sort of remind you and invigorate you to care, to fight. And these are things I think about when I start to get apathetic. Here they are, in no particular order. I think about how the IDF killed Shireen Abu Akleh. She was shot in the head in the West Bank in the city of Jenin during what her colleagues at the scene said was a burst of Israeli fire on a small group of journalists, covering an expected Israeli military raid. Israeli forces also attacked her funeral procession, kicking and hitting people with batons and causing mourners to carrying a coffin to lose balance and drop it to the ground. I also think about the bombing of the Palestinian Children Relief Fund's building. I also think about the fact that in 2022, a 7-year-old boy named Ryan Suleiman died of a heart attack after being chased by Israeli soldiers. I also can't stop thinking about this article that was published in The Guardian a bit over a month ago. It talks about the growing disabled population in Palestine, and I'm just going to read from it so I don't have to paraphrase. There is one aspect that is rarely talked about: what is happening to disabled Palestinians. That adults and children with disabilities are often the worst affected by conflict is an atrocity as old as war itself. If you are paralyzed, you cannot run from shrapnel. If you are deaf, you don't hear the sirens warning you to take cover. More than a decade of Israeli restrictions on imports and travel mean disabled people in Gaza were living without treatment and equipment long before the first missiles fell. Over the past year, Israel's humanitarian blockade has further stripped disabled civilians of what they need to survive. From assistive devices to medication and specialist food, others have lost their mobility aids in the bombing and have no way to escape. When her neighborhood was attacked in the early days of the war, 14-year-old Gaza, who has cerebral palsy, fled with her parents to her aunt's house. When they returned, their home was nothing but rubble. Gaza's wheelchair and walker had been inside. I was a burden to my family, she told Human Rights Watch. I gave up and sat in the middle of the road crying. I told them to go without me. The sheer scale of Israeli onslaught means it is not simply that disabled people such as Gaza are in danger, it is more that people are being made disabled every day. About 95,500 people have been injured in the conflict, with the World Health Organization estimating that more than 22,500 of those will have lifelong injuries. In the first few months of the war alone, more than 1,000 children in Gaza are estimated to have lost one or both of their legs. That equates to more than 10 children losing a limb on average every day. And this is the line that haunts me. The Gaza war is a mass disabling event where the casualties are not only those who die, but those who survive. It's important to remember that death and loss isn't the only plight we are fighting to stop here. Even for those who come out of this alive, their lives are irreversibly changed. Not just physically, but mentally. I mean, think of Ahmed, who's lost more than 20 people. Even if he comes out of this unharmed physically, think of the psychological effects he'll be enduring. You know, I lost someone very close to me a year ago, and it turned me into a shell of a person, and only recently have I started feeling like myself again, but at least I've been able to grieve, to process it. People in Gaza are experiencing so much loss and are having to fight to survive that they don't even have time to stop and grieve. They just have to focus on surviving. So yeah, that's just some food for thought I wanted to give you today. I appreciate that this video wasn't a fun one, but it was necessary. I know that my video won't end the suffering, but I hope it makes some form of positive impact. And I just want to remind you that most importantly, don't be apathetic. If you can donate to either fundraiser, amazing. That's really helpful. If not, then don't fret. Commenting, liking, and sharing this video will help tremendously. Thank you to Ahmed for trusting me to share your story, and thank you to all those watching. Okay, I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.